In this presentation, I'm going to discuss a book that I wrote in 2013 called the Pneumatikon, a 21st century introduction to the soul, reincarnation, and spiritual realities. Today we have an intersection of modern physics and ancient metaphysics. This book employs 21st century cosmology and quantum science to reinterpret ancient ideas of the soul and reincarnation, parapsychological phenomena, the death process, after-death states, and systems of advanced meditation and spiritual practice. It includes appendices on how to develop a meditation practice, control of elementals and weather, effective liturgies to assist the dead, and other rituals. It also includes links to online videos and references. In this presentation, we're going to discuss part one, which is about ordinary consciousness, which is actually a virtual reality. And part two, what absolute reality might be, the emanated consciousness of the eternal one. You can buy the paperback at lulu.com. You search for the title and you'll find it, or you can find other books by me. So let's discuss what we perceive as reality. I call it our human virtual reality. Matter and energy exist on macro and micro scales beyond human perception. We can't see without a telescope or microscope, an electron microscope, the things that are very, very small, very, very large. There's a very certain range of sight that we have that's based on just the electromagnetic spectrum of light, which is a very small part of the electromagnetic spectrum, etc. So we have a certain point of view that we can take, but it's very limited. On the macro scale, we really can't see things way beyond us in space or beyond us in time, or things that are so small that even with an electron microscope we can't really pierce the structures. So we perceive only over a comparatively minuscule range of time and space. So let's ask some questions. When a candle flame blows out, where does it go? Well, here's a candle flame. It disappears. Matter and energy transform one into the other, and they seem to disappear from our sight. Poof. It's gone. It's gone somewhere else, but it hasn't gone. All the energy is still there. It's just transformed. So when a person dies, what happens to mind and consciousness? These are questions that have been asked for ages. Is what we perceive really real? Well, here's how we model perception. When we touch and feel what we experience as a solid object, the negatively charged electron fields of the atoms of our fingers, which are 99.9999999% space, that meaning electron shells that are void of matter but pulsing with negatively charged energy. The negatively charged electron fields of the atoms in our fingers repel the negatively charged electron fields of the object that we are touching. This repulsive energy between electronic fields is transmitted to our brains in digital electronic pulses. Digital means it's either open or closed, on or off, yes or no. These electronic repulsive forces are interpreted by electronic memory banks that identify familiar mental impressions associated with tangibility, such as relative size, shape, texture, motion, and temperature. And so our brain puts together an image based on that. So our brains experience matter as static and solid, but in reality it is neither, as we will see in a moment. In the same way, when we see an object, energy in the form of photons stimulates receptors in our retinas, and these create digital electronic pulses that are transmitted to our brains and are interpreted by digital electronic memory banks as images. When we hear sounds from an object, waves of energy are transmitted by a mechanical medium like air or water, which is itself an energy field of vibrating atoms. And the waves stimulate tiny hair-like structures in the cochlea that vibrate sympathetically with sound frequencies according to physical length, like open strings on a piano or guitar, which send their digital electronic pulses to the digital memory banks. And there's just a limited number of these hairs of different lengths, just like there's a limited number of strings in a piano. So we can't hear above a certain frequency and below a certain frequency. We can only hear within a certain range. When we taste or smell an object, the same mechanical and electronic processes occur. Our brain fields combine with all digital sensory input to fit them into a familiar, culturally conditioned, digitized model that we can understand. So our percepts and concepts are shared, familiar, mathematical, digital, electronic patterns modeled in our brain. Our consciousness is human, digital, virtual reality, not actual reality. Ordinary human consciousness is based on preconditioned, culturally transmitted, cookie-cutter perceptions and emotional responses to actual realities that we merely simulate in our brains. Actual reality is a self-conscious pleroma of waves and frequencies. There's no such thing as empty space. Everything is full, but it's full of energy, not matter. What we see outside of us is really just a virtual reality that we project and play like a movie inside our brains. We can perceive submicroscopic realities and macroscopic realities only by using scientific instruments. And the images that these instruments provide simply mimic the ones we have created in our minds for the brain's perception of virtual reality. So let me ask a question. What does an ant crawling on the floor perceive about the world? What can he perceive? We perceive even less about reality than that ant. The nature of actual reality is pure consciousness, as experimental physics shows. Consciousness seems to be constructed of what scientists know as elemental qubits. Basically, the building blocks of reality are off and on, yes and no, open and closed. Now, our sensory world and we ourselves are part of a sea of interacting energy fields in eternal flux. We are complex waves that can perceive only our own perceptions. These are the realities that underlie ancient wisdom about the nature of human perception. For example, the Hindu concept of Maya, illusion, the Buddhist concept of appearance or dependent arising, the Hebrew Hebel, translated in the King James as vanity, vanity, or vanity of vanities, meaning insubstantial vapor. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus observed that perceived reality is mutable and fluid like a river. You cannot step into the same waters twice. So we can see that human consciousness is a synthesis of shared perception that varies among cultures but constitutes an ever-evolving virtual reality that is real only in the human mind. We don't see what a crow sees, we don't see what a bee sees, or what a fly sees, or what a dog sees. However, underlying that virtual reality are the actual realities that exist beyond limited human perception. These realities are aspects of a universal energy matrix known to the ancients as mind or spirit. In Greek thought, the matrix was allegorized as pneuma, the invisible force of air, and nous, or psyche, the mind or consciousness. In Hebrew thought, it was ruach, the many gradations of divine mind or fire. Ultimate reality is consciousness. We're going to have many objections to people that don't want to really understand things scientifically. They're going to call what we're going to say here as pantheism, as a theology of pantheism. It's not pantheism. Pantheism is actually a very small word. It refers to animistic concepts of awareness of entities of spirit in trees and hills and mountains and so on. Well, that's true. We can perceive that. But we're talking about panentheism. Panentheism is the most valid kind of way to perceive reality. The term means all in God, from the Greek pan, all, en, in, and theos, God. It's the hypothesis that the divine pervades and interpenetrates every part of the universe and also extends beyond space and time. And we have to really kind of go beyond quantum physics. Most contemporary quantum physicists regard matter and energy to be manifestations of digital quantum information bits known as qubits. These are discrete digital fundamental quanta that operate through the many arrows of space-time. And this implies that the manifest actual reality of the universe is dualistic, as in qubits, open and closed. But the ultimate consciousness, or intelligence, that underlies our digital universe seems to be monistic, one source, and probably resembles a continuous analog network underlying space-time, which would be, in our terms, a torus. The torus is an allegorical geometric representation of the universal mind of the eternal unity or Godhead as a torus. I'm taking this from Dr. Sid Roth's book, A Simple Explanation of Absolutely Everything. The theory of everything, TOE, my big toe, was the Holy Grail, the quests that Stephen Hawking and many other people were on. How can we unify all these theories of matter and energy that we see? And the torus is probably the best symbol of what universal mind and reality is like. So we have a universe of matter and energy. Matter originated in the energy of the Big Bang. Between matter and energy, there's a principle of conservation. One can transform into the other, but nothing is lost, nothing is gained. There are some interesting exceptions that modern quantum physicists speculate about, because we can find some exceptions that may indicate the existence of parallel universes and so on, but we'll take a glance at that later. But matter and energy transform into each other. Nothing is gained, nothing is lost. So matter and energy are, for all purposes, eternal because of the conservation laws. Now let's take a look at the modern model of an atom. We refer to what we call baryonic matter. That's what the nucleus would be made of, protons and nucleons, various kinds of nucleons and neutrons. We call that baryonic matter. But most of what an atom is in most of its size or mass is in its electron cloud, which goes around that nucleus. To get some scale, if we were to place a grape seed in the middle of a football field, that would be the difference in size of the nucleus compared to the electron cloud surrounding the atom. So the electron cloud is energy, electrical energy, negative energy. The nucleus is about 0.0001 times the size of the atom. The rest is electronic energy. A huge amount of energy creates a very tiny amount of matter. Famous formula, energy, E equals mc squared, mass times the speed of light squared, is how you figure out how much energy comes out of a tiny, tiny amount of matter, and how much energy it takes to produce a very tiny, tiny amount of matter. The volume of the baryonic nucleus is about 1/trillionth of what we perceive as solid matter. But baryons, which are neutrons and protons and some other stuff, themselves are made of quarks, which are vibrating waves of energy. It's just much more concentrated energy than we have in electrons. So we see the illusion of solid matter. We touch our electronic energy fields to those of an object, and the negative electronic forces repel each other, so we sense matter as solid, but it is anything but solid. We are, in fact, 99.9999999% space, not empty space, but space filled with an energy field, and so is everything we sense as solid. Matter and energy at the quantum physics micro level are conscious and intelligent. A famous experiment is a double slit experiment, in which an electron behaves like a wave until it's observed by human consciousness, and then it behaves like a particle. The other strange phenomenon is called entanglement. Quantum particles emerging together in the same space-time react and respond to each other even when they're separated by billions of light years. And that reaction is instantaneous. It's not at the speed of light. It's not the speed of gravity. It's instantaneous. Elementary particles, such as photons and electrons, appear to possess a certain degree of intelligence and awareness of the environment. The plasma and particle physicist David Bohm says, quote, "In some sense, a rudimentary mind-like quality is present even at the level of particle physics. And as we go to subtler levels, this mind-like quality becomes stronger and more developed. Consciousness appears to be as fundamental a property to elementary particles as properties that make it matter or physical force, that is, like mass and spin and charge. And just as mass, spin, and charge differ from one particle to another, it's probable that different particles have different degrees of consciousness, just as different human individuals have different degrees of consciousness." So there are many recent proposals about actual reality, string theory, and so on. We began with Newton and Einstein, where the planets were spherical and the orbits were circular, and then we went into classical physics, where we understood much more about the matter and motion and the motion of the planets and so on, into the theory of inflation, and finally into the concept of the multiverses and the TOE, the TOE equations, in order to try to find the fundamental laws of matter and energy of the universe. One of these is superstring theory, which posited the idea that the sort of the DNA of the digital universe are qubits, and that there are, in some of the theories, 10 dimensions, some 11, some 12, and so on in the universe. And we are in one of those dimensions. Tegmark came up with a mathematical universe hypothesis that our external physical reality is a mathematical structure. That's been demonstrated, but it's also been disputed. Then we have Lisi's E8 theory and other theories of everything that try to explain or understand what this architecture is that lies behind the conscious universe. And the theories of parallel universes, multiverses, and the membranes between them and how they might be transited and so on. Now, I want to talk about the ancient concept of the transmigration of the soul. The concept is that the soul is slowly built up, the human soul is a monad that passes through the mineral world and the vegetable world and the animal world into the human world, that the human soul is composed of a gradually accumulating and increasing complexity that takes with it a certain path through these different ways of existing in the mineral world and so on. So the idea is that we have, in science, evolved over billions of years from submicroscopic life forms on Earth. Universal consciousness, or whatever it is that guides the conscious or self-conscious universe, guides cosmic processes over great periods of time that produce biological life in spite of the tendency in physics towards entropy. Entropy is the tendency of all organized structures to become more and more disorganized, and finally become totally disorganized and descend into chaos. But in fact, with life, something has ascended, something has built and got stronger and more organized and more and larger and so on. And biological life goes completely against the tendency towards entropy that we find in physics. So the violent supernovae of stars produced all known elements as well as complex hydrocarbons that form the crystalline seeds of organic life. The theory of viroidal panspermia is a popular theory among many scientists today. The viroids are the ancestors of viruses. They are intelligent proto-DNA crystals that live in the vacuum and extreme temperatures of space. They used to be classified as non-living minerals. Space is replete with nebulae containing these seeds of life, still filtering down onto Earth. They are the biological ancestors of cellular nucleuses and mitochondrial DNA. Panspermia. Now, human consciousness has emerged over billions of years through the increasingly complex architecture of biological evolution that we can trace. Viroidal panspermia are the biological ancestors of cellular nucleuses and mitochondrial DNA. If we look at this chart and we follow it on the two axes, starting with viroids, which are the tiniest of things, and they are then combined in larger architectures, RNA viruses, DNA viruses, bacteria, and the higher eukaryotes, etc., over the periods of time as time passes, and the size of these things increases and increases, becomes more and more complex. It's like a computer program that gets developed and have more and more subroutines added to it. So self-conscious life evolved from these viroids, which are constructed themselves of qubit energy fields or waves vibrating in space like all matter. Our immortal souls are complex waves that have persisted and grown and evolved and accumulated greater energy fields through millions of transmigrations from simple quantum forms through mineral, vegetable, animal, and human structures. Now, this is the ancient theory of transmigration of the soul, which may have originated in India or was certainly sponsored by the Pythagoreans in ancient Greece and accepted by many philosophers. But without the scientific data to show what happens, we find that this goes hand in hand with the biological development of life, the life of biological entities, because biological entities are far more conscious structures and self-conscious structures than the tiny fundamental qubits. Now, most humans limit their conscious awareness to illusion and habit, but they have the opportunity to expand consciousness and evolve toward more expansive states of soul or consciousness. This is a little meme I put together with my face in the middle. My soul, my monadic soul, has evolved over millions of years from tiny, tiny forms that were mineral, like viroids and so on DNA, through the mineral kingdom, the animal kingdom, or the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom. And my particular pathway through all those different kingdoms is unique to me personally. So if we were to look at what my previous manifestations were as my soul, or as the energy that I actually am, the energy being that I actually am, made its way through time to the modern time. These are perhaps some of the different kinds of vegetables and minerals and animals and so on that are there. Now in THG, we learn to make contact with those parts of ourselves, because each one of those things gives us a power. It gives us an ability to do certain kinds of things that others that didn't experience those things might have had. So let's take a look at the ancient Egyptian and ancient Egyptian theory of cosmology, of the beginning and the origin of the world and so on, which is very similar to the Hebrew one in that it begins with the waters of the abyss of creation, of chaos. This is an ancient Egyptian emanation cosmology, and emanation is a much more compatible, the idea of emanation is much more compatible than with modern physical science than the idea of creation, which could make a lot of sense in terms of the Big Bang Theory. But the Big Bang Theory is one theory, and there are many things that could prove an exception to it. The universe could be an eternal thing. It could be parts of a multiverse. It could have many other aspects to it. So emanation is an eminently more intelligent way of understanding the coming into being of things. Well, the old Egyptian form posits the deity Atum. Atum stands on a little sand island in the middle of all this great sea of eternity. And he sneezes. and out of his nose comes another deity called Shu. You can remember that, Achu, Shu. And then he spits, and out of his mouth comes another deity called Tefnut. And these two deities together, we now have the beginnings of what we would call a universe that's based on two rather than one. It's dualistic, like the theory of qubits and so on. And these two generate together these beings, Nut and Geb. Now, as opposed to other cosmologies where the sky is masculine and the earth is feminine, in some of the Greek ideas and so on, in this theory, the sky is feminine, the goddess Nut, and the earth is masculine, the god Geb, and they have sacred intercourse, and through their intercourse of these two is produced all the other deities, and Isis, Osiris, and so on. So I like emanation, not creation, and panentheism. These are the ancient views of reality that are consistent with the insights of modern science. And so let's take a look at a couple of examples of emanation theories. We have the Chaldean or Babylonian scheme of the heavens. There are 4 stages of emanation that lead from the top, the intelligible triad of the first mind, and the depth, the abyss, all the way down into the full manifestation of the earth and matter. And it goes through 4 different kinds of stages or worlds. We have the first mind, the second mind, which consists of the Ingis and the Sinokis and the Teletarches, through the third mind, which are the guides of humanity, the intellectual guides, and so on, into the elementary world of the demiurge of the material universe, and the ideas of elemental orders and the earth and matter. So this is the order by which things are emanated. Now, Hebrew Kabbalistic theology has a very similar description. The Kabbalistic worlds, which are the world of Atziluth, the world of God, the world of the archangels, and Keter, the crown, and Ein Sof and Ein Sof Or, leading down into the world of Bria, the divine forces, so that Keter produces Chachma and Bina, and then through Tifereth into the third world down, the world of Yetzirah, or formation, creating the Sephira of Hesed and Geburah, and through Yesod into the world of Asiya, creating the Sephira of Netzach and Hod, into Malkuth, which is the earth and matter. So from the top, the world of Atziluth is emanated through the Sephirot, the world of Bria, which emanates the world of Yetzirah, the world of formation, and finally the world of Asiya. And this part of the world of Asiya is the part that we perceive. It's the only part that is perceptible to us. All the rest of it is imperceptible and unknown to our perceptions. Now, Kabbalistic theory produced a theodicy, but the big question is, how can evil arise from the good Godhead, the Abba, the eternal good? Because the Godhead itself and all things that are the origin of these emanations are considered to be good. There's nothing evil. There's not a good God and a bad God. So how can they arise? And so this theodicy, or this explanation for the existence of evil in our universe, was developed. And this is one form of it I'm going to show you. This is what we might call the Kabbalistic creation story. It's about emanation and formation. In the beginning, there's nothing. Nothing is represented by the formula ein, which means not. There isn't anything. Nothing exists. However, through that, and through the Godhead is emanated what's called Ein Sof, which is not limited. That is the infinite, infinite space, infinite time. And that produces, through the emanation of Godhead, a great burst of light, which was called the Ein Sof Or, the unlimited or infinite light. So we have from that the emanation of the Sephiroth, or the vessels, which represent the names or powers or virtues of the highest God, of the Abba, the origin of all things. Ein Sof, Or, and then Keter, the crown, producing the rest of the Sephiroth, which form a perfect reality. But these Sephiroth cannot communicate with each other. It's like the engine hasn't been turned on. In order for anything to happen and for time to begin, the Sephiroth, which are understood as vessels, just like pots holding liquids, the vessels, the outside of the vessels have to be broken. And when the vessels are broken, then the characteristics of Godhead can all communicate with each other and become a system. So here are the 32 paths of Genesis that are represented in the theory of the unfallen universe. And as the vessels are shattered, time begins. And notice that the vessels prolapse, so that the lowest of the Malkuth is unattached to the rest of them. It's no longer a perfect form of reality. It's an imperfect form. The shards or broken pieces of the vessels are called the klipot. They're evil energies. And what do we mean by evil? That means that they, because they were parts of the vessels that held everything in, that did not allow it to communicate, did not allow time to begin, did not allow the engine to start, they are therefore opposed to liberation and spiritual evolution and all the divine qualities like love and justice, etc., which they enclosed from each other. Now that they're set free and they're set loose, they're free in this dualistic universe of good and evil. Their essential nature is limitation, containment, and bondage. And that is the Kabbalistic definition of evil. They're allegorized as Shaitan, or Satan, and his hosts of evil spirits. And this metaphysical dualism reflects what we might call the digital reality, open and closed, yes and no, good and evil, of qubits of a dualistic universe, posited as a fundamental dualism in modern quantum physics. So now we might represent the mind of the universe, of the eternal reality of God, as a torus, as I explained before. A torus has no space in it, but it has motion within it because it's completely taking in things from one top side and moving them down at the bottom side. And the consciousness of each entity is a component. So I have represented the consciousness of each entity in this network as an I. So let's look at how we might describe an eternal Godhead emanating a pantheistic model of absolute reality that we might be able to relate then to a physical model, a quantum physical model, a quantum mechanical model of reality. We can say that the eternal one, the source of all being, does not exist, but it's absolutely real. The existence of God, which was from the Greek word existeme, which means to be perceptible, to be manifest, is a non-issue because Godhead is not something we can perceive. But reality is. The Eternal One transcends time and existence, but is equally immanent, personal, and intimately present. So in religious concepts of God, we can speak to God personally and pray to God personally, and yet God is both immanent and transcendent. The Eternal One is the universal pleroma of consciousness, transcendent with meaning, beyond all human understanding, and yet communicating personally and intimately with all levels of consciousness, human and not human. The Eternal One is not an anthropomorphic or theriomorphic deity, that is a deity in the form of an animal, nor any kind of deity. It does not project an image, does not have gender, and cannot be spoken about except allegorically or in terms of apophatic theology, negative theology, which says, well, God is not this, God is not that, God is invisible, God is immutable, and so on. Human thought and language cannot comprehend the Eternal One. There are no words, no language that can truly describe Godhead. But it can, by human thought, can attune itself, human consciousness can attune itself to the essential qualities of Godhead, such as wisdom and justice and compassion. The human mind can choose to attune itself to the Eternal One in expanding consciousness, or separate itself and remain static in ordinary consciousness. The nature of absolute reality emanated from the Eternal One is good. Absolute reality is good. The Eternal One is good. That is a definition of good. The operating principles of absolute reality are the inherent qualities of the Eternal One. These are wisdom, compassion, truth, beauty, justice, strength, love, and all the divine qualities that comprise absolute reality, or in the Kabbalistic model, the 10 Sephirot. This is the end of the presentation. Please support my videos by becoming a patron at patreon.com, Louis Kaiser. You can buy this paperback at lulu.com, just search for the title. It's also available as a Kindle edition for $9.99.